Welcome to Shannons Club TV, the program for all motoring enthusiasts to reflect on Australian road and race memories.
We're enjoying your comments with each new episode, so keep them coming on the Shannons Club website, where you can also catch up on past episodes. Stay tuned for a market update from the Shannons Auctions team, plus a test drive with an owner of our feature car.
Right now, let's take a look at the Aussie Ford that set new benchmarks for homegrown engineering finesse, the XE Falcon.
The story goes that Edsel Ford II, son of Henry Ford II and great-grandson of Henry Ford, on secondment to Ford Australia, said that the company spent millions of dollars on the XE Falcon's rear suspension just to please one man, Wheels editor Peter Robinson, who had been fiercely antagonistic towards the Falcon's leaf springs. Indeed, the XE was a hugely improved motorcar. The most significant of the many changes was the switch to a 6-link Watts linkage coil-sprung rear suspension on the sedans only. Edsel Ford's point was exaggerated, but contains the proverbial grain of truth. When the XE was introduced, 58% of all Falcons were fitted with tow bars, and perhaps 80% were sold into fleets at the lowest possible price. Bells and whistles were not on the fleet buyer's agenda. Mark, I'm thinking the new rear suspension was of far greater interest to Falcon race teams than it was to fleet buyers.
Oh, it sure was. I mean, this was big news at the time. You know, don't forget the Falcon had had the old horse and cart leaf springs since the first XK model back in 1960. So for Ford to switch to a multi-link coil spring rear end with a Watts linkage, that offered an enormous amount of new suspension tuning opportunities. They did eventually get it working well, but boy, it took a bit of sorting out initially, which I'll cover a bit later on.
The XE represented the culmination of the engineering and marketing leadership initiated by Bill Burke back in 1965. While its XD predecessor had been brilliantly marketed, especially with the alloy head version in 1980, the XE incorporated much needed extra engineering finesse, including Weber carburation on the 6s and optional 5-speed manual gearbox, wow, on a Falcon, sending the Commodore into the doldrums. Looking back on 56 years of Falcons, the XE is one of the highlights. Working for Motor Magazine, I conducted a comparison between a top-line Fairmont Ghia ESP6 and a V8 Commodore SLX. The worse the roads and conditions got, the more obvious was the Ford's superiority. As for the Fairlane LTD, when equipped with the 5.8-litre V8, they were ripper cars, though very thirsty, and had no Holden rivals. Sadly, they would be the last Aussie V8 Fords for many years, with the final V8 engines being manufactured here at the end of 1982. But Ford Australia beat Holden by 2 years with its electronic injection on the XE, and even the entry-level 3.3-litre 6 with Weber carburation and optional 5-speed gearbox was a surprise packet. Mark, the XE was also the last of the big banger Group C touring cars. Could we say it bowed out in style?
Well, you could say it did, but there were more than a few bumps, or should I say bump steers, along the way. The XE was the last Falcon powered by the iconic Cleveland 351 V8. It was also the first to be equipped with a more sophisticated coil spring Watts link rear suspension, which initially caused twitchy and unpredictable handling on the racetrack. In 1982, Bob Morris gave the XE a winning debut at Oran Park, but the result flattered to deceive. Although the new rear suspension was being widely praised by motoring journalists for its superior ride and handling qualities on the road, Falcon racers, led by Dick Johnson, were telling a different story. The big 10-inch wide cross-ply tyres and lower ride heights required for racing were not compatible with the new multi-link geometry, primarily designed for road use, with higher ride heights and narrower radial tyres. The result was some fearful rear bump steer and a lack of driver confidence. Dick Johnson once described this as trying to drive a forklift at 200 kilometres an hour, meaning that when he turned into a corner, the outside rear wheel used to toe out and to just throw you off onto the track. It was very, very scary for those early drivers.
Yes, that's very interesting. I have had a general view, as having done a fair bit of racing myself, that often a rear suspension can be just simple and keep it simple. But as a magazine road tester, the XE Falcon was just so much better on public roads than the XD. It was unbelievable. So that seems to me like that's the race car problem.
It was a race car problem because, as I said, it was predominantly designed for road use. And I remember all the race teams were looking forward to it. They were going, how good's this? We're going to have a coil-sprung Watts link rear end.
Because the rear axle's located better and so on, but that was predicated upon the car being basically at a certain ride height and using a certain kind of tyre.
Yeah. No, it was a very tough time, for sure. Despite its early handling woes, Falcon loyalists persevered with the XE in 1982, including Ford stalwart Murray Carter, former V6 Capri racer Steve Masterton, and touring car champ Bob Morris, who missed out on a start at Bathurst after a broken wheel caused co-driver John Fitzpatrick to crash heavily in practice. The XE's racing future looked brighter in 1983, when new rule freedoms introduced mid-season allowed much larger rear tyres, which helped to tame its wayward handling. Dick Johnson's colour change from blue to green was looking like a good omen at Bathurst, until a spectacular crash in qualifying turned the green's tough Falcon into a green stuffed Falcon. However, Johnson regrouped in 1984 with a new XE and a simmering bragging rights battle with Steve Masterton over which team had Australia's fastest Falcon. Masterton won the AMSCAR series while Johnson wrapped up his third Australian Touring Car Championship. Sadly, it was also the last year of Australia's homegrown Group C rules and the end of the 5.8 litre Cleveland V8 Falcons, severing a bloodline that started with the Bathurst-winning XW GTHO in 1970. One of many reasons why the XE Falcon will always hold a special place in local Ford racing history. Remember to join the Shannons Club, where you can connect with other enthusiasts around the country.
Hi, my name's Brian. This is my 1982 XE ESP. Only 178 XE ESPs 351s were built. I purchased it about 12 months ago. Nothing's been done to the car. It's all factory. What you see is what you get. Colour's a Monza red. Just draws you to it, you know. The red over the charcoal I really, really like. Key specs of the car is European sports pack. Air conditioning, power steering, surround sound, factory 351, factory 4-speed manual. I've always been passionate about Fords. I grew up in the family, always drive on Fords, and had a Ford as my first car, an XE Falcon. Still got that in the back shed, with one day hoping to restore it. .351 4-speed manual. You could go out for a drive, you want to overtake someone, you've got plenty of power to do so. If you want to just cruise around, you can just cruise around. Very smooth and comfortable. Absolutely awesome to drive. Probably 5 or 6 times a year I use it, just on occasions. Other than that, it's just sit in the garage at home. Future plans for the car is to keep it as stock and as original as I can, and hopefully in the future hand it down to my kids.
Well, Shannon's National Auctions Manager Chris Borrabon has dropped by to bring us up to speed on the XE Falcon. Welcome, mate.
Hey, John.
The XE Falcon, Chris, I remember when it was launched how much superior it was in every way to the XD. Wheels magazine even had Falcon the Fantastic on the cover, which was a big deal with the red car. So at the time we thought it was better. Has the market felt that way about it?
Look, I think the market's felt that way on some of the special models, especially things like the ESP, where we've seen a pretty sharp climb in the last few years. Look, otherwise you don't see too many XEs around, or, XEs and XEs. You don't see much on the market. Definitely through auction, we don't see much at all. I'd like to probably see more Fairmont ESPs come through with the 351 in it, because they're very sought after today.
Well, that was effectively, a 1980s Falcon GT in everything in name, wasn't it? 351, 4-speed, just all the right stuff. And I think what's really special about that car, even though Peter Brock was doing the Holden dealer team cars, this was purely in-house. This car was done by Ford, and it's very, very special pedigree there, I think. Yeah.
Well, when Wheels did the comparison, they compared the XE ESP 5.8 against a Brock Commodore. Like a bit of an unfair competition, really. But the XE, what about the mainstream models, the wagons, all the fleet specials?
Well, they didn't. They all had leaf springs, didn't they? The coil-sprung Watts link was only in the sedans, and the leaf springs stayed in, I think,
that's
the wagon,
right, the wagons, the utes,
and the panel van. So that's something to look at. It's not across the board.
I mean, again, very popular cars in their day. We saw a lot of those. Obviously, probably used as family cars and got run into the ground. And probably hence today why we don't see too many low mileage examples around. But again, if you can find that special model, that one off the LTD model version or the Fairlane version, which were well-equipped cars in their day, probably something to look at.
It was a Ford marketing high point era. They were still using that Bill Burke kind of thinking. When they brought out the XE, I mean, I remember I drove a base model car in a Crook colour, Bahama beige, but it was a base model car with the optional 5-speed gearbox. So it had cloth seats, Weber carburetor, 5-speed gearbox, Watts link rear end. It's like they were really making an effort to appeal to the private enthusiast buyer, which they hadn't done so much with the XD.
So what's the pecking order now for collectors? Like, we always talk about the Fairmont Gear ESP, 351 4-speed, that would have to be the pick of the bunch for XE, and then you...
That's right.
And where do the Fairlanes and the LTDs fit? Are they lower than that car in terms of value, or...?
Absolutely. I think today really the pecking order is the 351 4-speed car in the ESP. Then it probably goes down to the LTD and then down to the Fairlane. Obviously, with the V8, the FD with the V8 was quite a rare option.
That was the last of the great LTDs, and they only made it for a few months because they dropped the V8 engine at the end of 1982. But that car came standard with you could get the 6-cylinder engine or the V8. Leather trim, they dropped that for velour after that, and a moonroof and the TRX wheels, which seemed like the greatest thing in 1982. But
the metric wheels,
But what an interesting car, but I can't think when I last saw one.
No, that's right, and that's the point. I mean, you can be driving every day, and to try and find one is very rare. You might find one at the old Ford day annually, and that's probably where.
I mean, mustn't forget, of course, this was the last of the 351 police interceptors. There were plenty of highway patrol officers who wept when this car came off because it was just a phenomenally good car. Do you see chases around at all?
Once in a while they do come up, and again they're probably more at shows against. I think they're fairly tightly held with club members, and
people tend to do them up in the police colours and everything.
That's exactly right.
The police preferred the Falcon to the Commodore because of its high-speed stability. Peter Robinson and a lot of the motoring press went on about how superior the Commodore was. In my opinion, I actually wrote a comparison test. I thought the XE was a better car than the Commodore.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
And you could also put two big burly police officers and a crim in the back seat.
Well, it was a roomy car.
Have you been in the back seat between two burly?
Oh, that's really interesting, Chris. Well, thanks for bringing us up today.
Thank you, guys.
And remember, you can keep up to date with all the latest Shannons auctions news on the Shannons Club website. If you want a lasting memory of the XE Falcons in competition, check out the huge archive at autopics.com.au. John, looking back at the XE, I mean, this really encapsulates a time when Ford Australia were just doing everything right, weren't they?
And their marketing was so clever, and they could tailor the car to suit every market, from the fleet market all the way through to that fussiest of all markets, the New South Wales Highway Patrol, among others. And weren't they cool, those police interceptors?
And it really was a magic time in terms of the stars aligning for Ford, because don't forget, Holden and Ford took their own bet in terms of the future of the car, world oil prices, supplies, all that sort of stuff. In 1982, it all started to settle down again, and Ford had made the right decision. And
in 1979, they would never have believed that could have been the case. But it was not just luck, it was their cleverness. Getting the alloy head onto the Falcon engine, fantastic. publicity, and then making the XE so much a better car with that really quite sophisticated rear suspension. Terrific.
And then they led the market pretty much throughout the 1980s.
They pretty much did.
Yeah, it was a remarkable time, wasn't it?
Indeed.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed reflecting on the excellent XE Falcon. We look forward to your company next time on Shannons Club TV. Bye for now.